Most of the innovators you'll meet in this podcast are innovating within their chosen profession. Today we meet someone whose innovation is the profession. In fact, it's the co-creation of an entirely new profession, one that has become integral to the way work is done and teams are managed in some of the world's leading organizations. I'm talking about agile coaching, and my guest is author and coach Lyssa Adkins, whose roller coaster career story has equipped her the hard way to help leaders, teams, and organizations to thrive, and potentially to help us all see a new way to tackle some of the world's biggest problems.
You're listening to The Innovator's Journey, a podcast about the lives and careers of creative people, technology, and the future of work, with your host, Jonathan Winter.
Lyssa Adkins, hello and welcome to The Innovator's Journey.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I can't wait to find out what we actually uncovered together in this podcast.
Looking forward to it. So to get started, tell us what you do and why it matters.
Most recently, I'm calling myself an agility and leadership coach. I'm someone who's been in the agile movement since the very beginning. And if you don't know what that word is, that's okay. Basically, you can think about agile or agility as modern ways of working that put human ingenuity in the middle, in the core of our way of working. And so, agility and leadership coach, which basically means I help leaders and leadership teams make their organizations more fit for this century and the complexity that we're in.
Right. It sounds intriguing and fun. And I've heard about agile probably more in software than elsewhere, but I'm always intrigued to know how it's spreading and how it's being used in organizations generally. So looking forward to finding out more. Lyssa, why does that matter so much right now?
I think it matters so much right now because agility, the frameworks related to it, are all in this basket of future of work methods or philosophies coming into the world of work now. And we are definitely at the moment of sea change where doing things by the book, according to a mechanistic rule, no longer works like it used to, even though we just sometimes double down on it and try to make it work, try real hard to make it work. It doesn't, because the world we're around is ever increasingly less predictable, highly interconnected, changeable in a way we have never encountered before in business. And so we have to have ways of working with what is. And agility and all of these future of work ways help us work with what is versus what we're trying to force to make happen.
Okay, I think that's important because it seems to me there are fewer and fewer levers you can pull to make things happen in the world these days. And the bigger and more complex the organization you're talking about, the more that is so. Hearing politicians talk about the health service this morning on the radio, wow, that's a big complex system, especially here in the UK. And improving and changing stuff is not straightforward. So I can see that that's really important today. Now, this podcast is called The Innovator's Journey. So I'd like to start with your journey, your personal and professional story. Where does the Lyssa Adkins story start?
The story starts with just a great deal of dissatisfaction as a young adult and being in college and coming into the workplace and looking around going like, God, why are these people are all wasting their potential? What the hell's going on here? And then I sort of put that concern aside and just stepped into the big machine of project management and just tried to make that machine work and was quite successful at it. But I think that the root of my innovator's journey starts with looking around me and being incredibly sad about the untapped potential. In fact, the potential that's being squashed in most organizations.
Tell me a little bit about that experience. What were the sort of key milestones in your project management career?
I think the milestones were just more and more complex projects. I wouldn't even say complex, more and more complicated projects. More of them at the same time, and then eventually managing a bunch of project managers who each had more and more complicated projects more and more of the time and just, trying to essentially make predictable and repeatable things that inherently weren't predictable and repeatable. And I didn't see that we were all working within a system that didn't have our best interest at heart, that basically was making it impossible for us to deliver things that clients are delighted about, deliver early in a way that meets the client's business need. I didn't understand that we were hitting our head against a brick wall that we were not able to move until I was exhausted from hitting my head against the brick wall and just said, forget it. I'm going to go take a really simple project management job. Don't even care what it's about. Just need to get my kid to swim team on time, focus on that part of life.
So would you describe that as a kind of a crisis moment?
Oh, it definitely was. It definitely was a crisis moment because I was leaving a role as a PMO manager, and we had just set up an $80 million project. 26 simultaneous work streams, 500 people working on it, like all of this ridiculous setup as if we could actually even understand how this thing was going to happen. And of course we couldn't. And working nights and weekends and not being able to stop thinking about how behind the eight ball we were just took its toll. And I said, I don't need to be in this anymore. And I didn't understand at that time that I was working in a system that really was not working.
It sounds as though you do now have a diagnosis for why the system wasn't working.
Well, I'm not sure about a diagnosis, but I think a treatment came along I've got Mary Poppins in my mind now. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. This treatment came along, and it was called Agile, and specifically one of the Agile frameworks called Scrum. And I went to this other organization to be one of the regular project managers running simple everyday projects. And they're like, we're going to do Scrum, and you're going to be a Scrum master. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. At this point, I'm so exhausted from the whole project management thing. I've been through every single project management methodology that had come along in a 20-year period by this point.
So this might have been just another.
I was like, this is the flavor of the month, whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that what was coming down the pike was not just the flavor of the month, that it really was a dose of very good medicine for a very ailing system.
And it sounds as though, you and I both sort of said that we were shocked by people's experience, and in your case, your experience of bigger organizations that you were working in and how dysfunctional it was. Why was it a surprise to you? Did you have any sort of background that would give you insight into the world of work and the world of business?
No, I didn't. My parents are blue-collar workers, and my brother and I were the first to go to college and get 4-year degrees, and it was a typical American success story, if you will, that my parents worked really hard to get us through college and to give us the opportunity to then be in businesses where we looked around and went, wow, this is dysfunctional.
So you've been kind of looking up to it for your whole life, and your parents have been investing all they could to get you to that point, and then launched you onto something that was actually not so great.
Yeah, and it actually took 20 years for it to dawn on me that it wasn't so great. That whole time I was working the system, thinking I was being successful, thinking I was getting ahead, thinking I was making a difference, maybe, but that wasn't really one of my main criteria at that point. It was really just like being in the machine and working the machine.
It's what people say about culture, isn't it? That the nature of culture is that we often don't know that we're in it.
Exactly. And so that's the thing you said. So why was I so shocked about the untapped potential or the squashed potential I saw around me? The thing that shocked me about it is that most people didn't recognize it in themselves. That they just thought, this is the way it is, this is the way it has to be. I just put my head down, I do my little piece. Yeah, I get it that we're not actually delivering something the client still wants today because they said they wanted 8 months ago and everything has changed. But the project plan says this is what we're doing. So we're just going to put our heads down and do it. Quite desperation.
What is it you hated most about it then?
Well, I hated most how I bought into that and became someone that I didn't want to be. I became very much a controlling person. People used to say, she's a pretty dog with a bone.
So the means of getting things done is through more and more force.
More and more force and more very nicely wrapped manipulation.
And I think you described to me that reports, for example, might be done that were different for the client, different
Oh,
internally.
yeah. I mean, when things got real in projects, meaning that we were in the middle of it, we were realizing, wow, there's a lot more work here than anyone ever imagined. There would start to be a number of accounts. One account would be what the client was seeing, and that tended to be much more rosy than what was really happening. Another account was what the steering group inside the organization was seeing, and that was a little bit less rosy, but definitely not real. And then there was the account that the team was working on, and that was messy, and it was terrifying in many ways. And it was part of this machine relies on us not telling the truth to each other. So this is how this happens. And after a while, I just didn't recognize myself anymore.
So in the new organization, having made a change, you discovered a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
What was that like? Was it a sudden realization because actually things were very different in the organization, or did it dawn on you gradually?
I was so lucky to have a mentor assigned to me and someone who had experience with bringing agility into other organizations. Now, this was very early on in the whole wave of Agile, right? So we were very, very lucky. I can't even begin to express my gratitude that the organization brought people like him in, and him in particular.
So presumably this was in software, was it?
This was in, I would say information systems, right? So this was in a bank.
Okay, but the practices of Agile, they come from the software world, don't they? You have teams of developers doing Scrum and so on.
Yes, they do. Although I personally believe they work better outside of software.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Way easier outside of software than inside software, and way more impactful, I think.
Oh, intriguing.
You know, since I've been working within Agile frameworks and principles now for about 16 years, projects don't go badly anymore. They used to. But what we weren't doing was one of the very fundamental things in agility, which is if you have a very large thing to build, what you do is slice through it like slicing a piece of a wedding cake. And you get a little bit of all the pieces you need to make something functional so that you can then say, okay, great, we've got something functional. Now, how do we want to change it?
So this is the fundamental idea of prototyping things and then iterating with feedback from somebody like the customer or stakeholder.
That's one of the main principles about Agile for delivering a thing, like a piece of software or a service, something like that. The thing that is the most impressive to me about agility is how it helps us in our modern era with everything, because what agility is really good at is helping us metabolize change. And change keeps coming again and again and again. I mean, even at a faster rate these days. I mean, any plan, it doesn't last very long. It lasts like a nanosecond in some cases, when plans used to seem to last a lot longer.
So just going back to your story for a second, you had multiple experiences in traditional project management. You got frustrated, got burned out, and almost by accident discovered Agile. How did the journey carry on from there?
Well, the journey carried on from there with my mentor really helping me understand that the very things I was doing that I thought were helpful for a team to deliver what they wanted to deliver together were actually anti-helpful. And worse than that, they were harmful to people. Just the many, many ways I would try to control things. The many ways I would try to insert my uninformed technical opinion about things because I could see a way that maybe this project needs to go now. And what I was not doing was unleashing the potential of the team members who actually are the experts on the topic and having them come up with all of the brilliant ways to solve a problem. So here's the thing. After the very first 30-day iteration, I turned to my mentor, Mike, and I said, this is beautiful. They didn't need to tell me how to do anything. And every time I found myself wanting to tell them what to do, if I could hold myself back, I would see that they would come up with a better idea within just a few minutes or maybe a day. I never had to wait very long. And so now I'm seeing all the ways that I was actually in the middle of things, hindering the path forward and harming the people in the process.
It's a very different way of operating.
It's a very different way of operating. And so basically, that is the beginning of the identity crisis. So if I'm not telling people what to do all day long, what is my value? And there are a lot of people in the modern workplace right now facing that identity crisis, because not only project managers, but managers of all types that have grown up through organizations have grown up based on their expertise and how good they are at telling people what to do.
The Peters principle.
Yeah. And since we're in now an era of complexity, even if you were the smartest person on the planet and you knew exactly what to do, there is no way that you would be able to, by yourself, figure it all out and tell people exactly what to do in a way that it would have it come together at the end. It wouldn't work.
So when you're an agile project manager or a manager, what is the alternative paradigm?
The alternative paradigm is to release people into the creativity and the discipline of a very simple framework. Just a few things people do all the time to keep themselves coordinated and on track together to deliver a real thing in a very short period of time. And focus instead not on the minutia of what people are going to do and how they're going to solve the technical problems or the challenges that they've been asked to solve, but focus instead on how can I create a more hospitable environment for them to create together.
It sounds as though it was quite a big journey for you personally to move between one mode and another mode of operating. Who or what most helped you to do that?
Back to my mentor, Mike Vizdos, the big help that he was being a very gentle but persistent mirror to me. He would come up to me, he says, "You're doing it again." I'm like, "What?" "You're trying to control them." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "Oh, crap, I am trying to control them." "You're exactly right. It's wrapped up in this thing called facilitation. I think I'm facilitating. What I'm actually doing is trying to force my opinion." Oh my goodness.
And for those of us who might not have a wonderful critical friend like Mike, how do we catch ourselves doing that?
Well, it is possible. Part of what helps people catch themselves doing that is the work that came out of my identity crisis, which is starting to talk about this shift and how big it is and how much you have to be on guard to catch yourself in these moments, to notice this command and control monster. That's one version. The other version is to notice I'm just going to sit in the background and not do anything else monster. I mean, for some people, it's the opposite of command and control that they need to work with. So since that time, there are all kinds of books and courses and a much better understanding of the profession of agile coaching and pathways to help you develop not only your knowledge, but also your being so that you can work in this different way.
Great. So we've heard a lot about your personal discovery, and we're going to hear in a minute about how you've then taken that to help other people. Before we get there, I asked you to think of a creative artefact, Lyssa, that in some way represents your creative journey as an innovator. And I have no idea what you've chosen, but I'd love to know.
Well, it's so funny because we're actually in the territory of talking about it right now. When I sat back and thought about that question, what's an artifact, a creative artifact that somehow talks about my innovator's journey, what I found was something in the Coaching Agile Team's book that is a literal journey line.
Oh, wow. I mean, it looks like artistic, but a kind of business diagram.
It's a bunch of ups and downs, yeah.
Okay.
And so basically...
But it's not the economy we're seeing going up and down there, in that line.
No, it's my professional journey. It's called a journey line. And the reason why this is a creative reflection of my innovator's journey is that innovation for me has always come through my first person story. There's something I'm experiencing personally, an identity crisis. I start to write a blog about it called The Road from Project Manager to Agile Coach. I don't even get the first 5 blog posts out before someone approaches me and says, "I need you to write a book for my series." And I'm like, "Are you crazy? I don't know anything about this." Fast forward a little while later, realizing how much I do know about it from the perspective of this huge skills shift, internal shift, belief shift that's necessary to work in these modern ways of working.
That's fascinating. And I can see from that diagram that it's got some pretty steep ups and downs. I know I've done my own timeline before, but those look quite extreme. I mean, there's some painful moments in that timeline.
There are some painful moments.
How have you managed to kind of stay positive in the downs as well as the ups? Or have you? I mean, you've described that as part of the journey, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't avoid pain. And this is something that I've gotten even better and better at over time, is when I'm in the downs, actually feeling the downs, not trying to sidestep it, not getting dragged down in it per se, but understanding that everything is cyclical and that something's going to happen, some depth is trying to happen. When it's a down, it's not necessarily a down, it might just be a depth.
What an interesting distinction. Lyssa, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for telling me a little bit more about your creative artifact and your personal journey and the downs as well as the ups. In a moment, we'll be back to talk about your work developing the profession of an agile coach and your vision for the future of how work itself is changing.
You're listening to The Innovator's Journey, a podcast about the lives and careers of creative people, technology, and the future of work, with your host, Jonathan Winter.
So, Lyssa Adkins, the innovation we're featuring today is your work as one of the shapers of a new profession, that of agile coaching, which we've been talking about just now. So your innovation has been particularly around codifying things that were in, I guess I could describe it as an emerging profession. In 2010, you wrote a book, Coaching Agile Teams, which has so far sold 75,000 copies in 9 languages. And you co-founded the Agile Coaching Institute, which has developed more than 10,000 people. So having talked about Agile as a project manager, now could you tell me, what is an Agile coach?
So an Agile coach is essentially helping people in an organization use the frameworks and the values of agility to deliver whatever they're doing. Whatever service, whatever product they're building, whatever thought work they're doing. We're using these as a way to be in human-to-human connection with each other and to deliver things that matter as early as humanly possible.
So would you be typically coaching an individual or coaching a team?
An Agile coach coaches teams and individuals, primarily focused on team performance and also on organizational performance, because there are Agile coaches at the organizational level as well. So focused on the performance of the system, whether it's a team or a larger part of an organization. And then, of course, as we've already talked about in my own journey, how agility put me at an edge of my understanding and my belief system, it does that to other people as well. And so there is a need for one-on-one coaching, and usually bringing in more the skills of professional coaching than the skills of mentoring or expertise in that case. So part of what I codified with other creators was an Agile coaching competency framework, which basically said, look, there are 4 major delivery mechanisms that you're using: professional coaching, professional facilitation, mentoring, and teaching. So at any moment, which one of those you're quote unquote standing in is going to change based on what the team or the person in front of you is needing next.
Okay, so if you're a coach, you might be kind of mentally switching between those 4 things.
Absolutely. And we're doing this within the context of helping an organization use agility to advance their goals, whatever they are. So the deep expertise we're holding is of Agile practices, values, principles, like the way the Agile stuff works.
And so presumably if I'm managing an organization of any size, even a large one, I might say, look, we need to do this stuff. Let's try it I suppose if we're being agile, let's try it in a small area and see how it goes. But my vision would be, I'm going to need a bunch of coaches. I'm going to need everybody in the organization to think differently. Is that right? It's quite a big intervention.
It's quite a big intervention. And there are cases where there are hundreds of Agile coaches in an organization of some significant size.
So to support that kind of intervention, then what you were doing was to help create the kind of infrastructure of a profession that could do that, so that you could then certify tens, hundreds of agile coaches to help an organization on that journey.
Yes. Yeah.
I've never spoken to anybody who's kind of been around kind of starting a new profession. What's that all like?
It is an incredible privilege, actually. And I mean, let's be clear about it. I'm not the only one who did this. I would say I was a passionate player in the early days of it. And for sure, the book I wrote, Coaching Agile Teams, codified a lot of things and started getting us on the pathway to realizing we could absolutely identify competencies and learning objectives for people who are in the profession of agile coaching. And then later on, other people took the work that I and others had done. They've advanced the ball tremendously, and now we have a code of ethics for agile coaching. So the things you need are competencies, standards, ethics for a profession. And so now these things exist.
So if we just if we think about how we're doing in the world with agile, how if we were to take 100 organizations, how many of them would be in the old world and how many would already be somewhere in the new world? How are we doing on a sort of scale of 1 to 100?
Newer organizations and smaller organizations are doing beautifully. Organizations that were already large and very wedded to their processes do beautifully with agile in pockets. I have not seen an quote-unquote agile transformation that has been successful to change, let's say, a 50-year-old organization that has 100,000 people working for it. Haven't seen that happen. I don't even know that should be an aspiration, honestly.
It may be too difficult?
Not too difficult, maybe not even necessary. Because what's happening is the evolution of organizations. So if you think about how many organizations have fallen off of the Fortune 100 list in the last 10 years, organizations are dying.
Yeah, so there's this sort of cycle of death and renewal that actually is it's part of capitalism, it's part of the world, it's part of nature.
Part of life.
Yeah.
And so you don't do agile as a thing unto itself. You do agile because there's some sort of business goal you're going for or some sort of higher purpose you're going for that makes the pain of all that change worth it. And if organizations are successful enough doing what they're doing, why would they?
Now, you've talked about a pretty big motivator. When we were talking before, you were talking about a large motivator for all of us around climate change at the moment and the need for us all to do things differently. In what way can this profession of agile coaching and of agile practices help with that?
So this year, I am really on the bandwagon to help Agilists understand that we have some emerging superpowers as a worldwide community of millions and millions of people on every landmass on the planet, maybe not Antarctica, maybe not the Arctic Circle, everywhere else though. We have an amazing network and some emerging superpowers that can be really, really useful, I believe, to add to what people are already doing for these large planetary challenges like climate change, like the fragility of our financial system, like poverty, like extremism. Just on and on down, biodiversity loss, all of it.
Wow. Because actually a lot of these these are really the big challenges, aren't they? A lot of them seem intractable simply because they are large and complex. Does that make them, in fact, amenable to...
It makes it perfect. It makes them perfect. The fact that they're large and intractable makes them perfect for agility.
Even at an international level?
Well, yeah, because you wouldn't solve a problem like mass migrations, which we're about to experience at a level we've never experienced before as soon as we start to get, the idea that climate refugees are happening in every nation, which will probably be fairly soon here. So like mass migrations as a huge topic, right? You wouldn't necessarily have a solution for that for the whole globe. You're going to have a lot of different solutions in different places that can then become cosmo-local, which means because we're in such tight communication with each other as a community that experiments, once something happens somewhere else, the experiment can ripple out to other places, right? And we can continue to learn. We're just creating a bigger system that learns together, essentially.
This makes it really, really important for us to learn how to do it well.
Yeah.
And I think you've already said that it's kind of patchy and it's been challenging.
It is patchy, but you know what? All those places where it's super patchy and challenging, I'm starting to think of them as a real godsend. Like, they are the worst most inhospitable places to practice. And if you can practice agility there and get even a little bit of uplift, well, then maybe when you go and work on one of these big global challenges that you care about, or something that hurts your heart in your local community, maybe then you'll find out how good it always was.
Right. Okay. I think it's time for us to talk about the future of work. Because let's try and sort of capture a really strong vision for how work could and should be in the future if it was all working well, because you've so convincingly described how important it is. In 5-10 years' time, or is it longer? I don't know. Describe to me what's going to be different in the way we all need to work or could be working.
I think what's going to be different in 5 to 10 years from now, especially as more systemic shocks happen to our societies. The pandemic was one example. I don't believe it's the last systemic shock we're going to experience. So as we experience those, what's different is that we don't try to make the one end all be all plan to quote unquote fix it or make it better. What we do is we bring smart people together and we say, okay, how can we create the thin slice of something that is useful here, something that starts to address the issue with the known facts, not in abstract, but with the known facts on the ground right now where we are sitting. And then we do that thing, whatever that thing is. And then we inspect it and we say, do we want to build on this? Or do we want to try something else because it didn't work as well as we thought? And so I think it's humans iterating together at a global scale.
Evidently, it's going to require all of us to be doing things differently. And you've reassuringly described that the practices of Agile don't have to be complex. We can boil it down to some quite simple things. But I don't think you've convinced me that it's an easy journey personally for us to make the change.
It's not an easy journey personally. And this is where the crux of my work is, because I work with leadership teams now, all of whom are facing an unrecognized identity crisis. Because the ways they've been working don't work anymore. The new ways are not quite in their reach now, even though they exist. Even though they exist, new ways are not quite in their reach yet, and they feel a little bit like they're in limbo. So I think that it's going to require us all to grow up quite a bit if we are going to have a continued presence on the planet.
I'm going to have to ask you the technology question, because one of the things we're looking at in this podcast is the potential for technology in different areas of work. Can it help us in some way with this journey? How might AI, for example, really help us all to change towards being more agile in the way we work?
You know, it's so funny we're talking about AI because it was just this weekend that I came across the first AI Agile coach created by a colleague of mine. Technology will undoubtedly help and it will undoubtedly hurt. There's almost nothing that is 100% good or bad, I think, in this modern world. And maybe the world has always been like that, honestly. You know, the best thing I've read recently about it is that we need to think about AI as our children that we have to rear. It's just like when you're raising a child, that child is exposed to all kinds of things. And it's your job as the parent to guide them on an ethical and moral track. Now, this is where it gets a little bit dicey, because if I look at the mass of humanity, I'm like, yeah, we're not doing so good on that. You know?
That doesn't give us such good hope.
It does not give me great hope. It really doesn't.
And if we just look specifically at what you've been talking about with the leadership journey and how leaders all need to change the way we operate, what is it that technology cannot do? You know, you're a coach and a developer of coaches and of the profession of agile coaching. What is it that we're never going to, or as far as we can tell, be able to substitute technology for? And where does the special value of the human lie?
Well, everyone keeps saying that the special value of the human lies in empathy and human-to-human connection in a way that artificial intelligence won't be able to do. I'm not sure artificial intelligence won't be able to do that eventually, and maybe faster than we realize. But for right now, what I know is that there is some alchemy at work between me and a group of people when I'm working with them, or me and a leadership team, or me and one leader. When I'm working in any of these settings, what is happening is that the people are immersed in their context. They're immersed in their content, and they're struggling with something. And because I am working at the systemic and pattern level with them, and because I'm in touch with something, I don't even know where things come from. Sometimes a question comes out of the ether, and my only job is to be courageous enough to ask it. And if I ask it, sometimes that creates an immediate shift in what the group is doing and what's possible for them. So there's something about the relationship system and how it works that AI won't touch for quite a while. We as human beings don't understand how it works, but it is palpable and real.
So, Lyssa, you've told us a lot about your journey and some of the things you've gone through to get where you are today. If you were giving one piece of advice to your younger self, what would you say?
Sometimes you trade being kind for being right. It's not too early to start being kind.
And if you then had some advice to the whole world, if you had a giant billboard on which you could write absolutely anything, what would you write?
It's not too late for us to recognize our inherent oneness and to operate from there.
Lyssa Adkins, thank you so much for sharing your story, your career, your innovative work, and your vision for the future of work for all of us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Innovator's Journey with me, Jonathan Winter. If you enjoyed today's story, do share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe to make sure you hear future episodes. This podcast was recorded in Riverside, edited and transcribed automatically in Descript, with algorithmic music from SoundDraw and artwork generated with DALL-E. The rest was human.